Hi, Kathy White, Certified Professional Ergonomist. Today we're going to talk about the computer mouse. First, we'll talk about the traditional mouse, and then we're going to compare to a vertical mouse and give you some potential advantages to consider if you are looking at moving from the traditional design to the vertical design. I'll start with talking about the traditional mouse. We'll move this aside and I'll be a hand model for you today. This mouse is something I purchased on Amazon. It was not very expensive. It comes as a wireless configuration. Certainly there are wired versions out there. What I do like about the wireless is it allows you to be able to set this up wherever you need for your comfort level, hopefully close to your body, and hopefully in a space that allows you to be able to move that mouse as much as necessary for cursor activation. Something to consider with the traditional mouse is making sure it fits your hand. Some are small like a travel mouse. This one you can see fits my hand quite well. I'm able to keep my thumb off to the side and keep my wrist into what we call a straight or a neutral posture. The keys are easy to activate. I have a cursor wheel here in the middle. A few things that happen with people using a traditional mouse, and you may be guilty of some of these things as well, is what we call flicking the mouse. Moving the mouse from side to side. A lot of times this happens if you're in a tight space with the mouse, or it may just happen due to the way that you use it and the way you've always been using it. I would encourage you to be mindful and make sure you're not flicking the wrist while mousing. Another thing to consider along those lines is using what we call the whole arm mousing technique. This is where you're using your forearm and your wrist and your hand and your fingers. Moving everything as a whole unit is the whole arm mousing technique. This is where you need to make sure you have enough room on your work surface in order to do this and eliminate flicking your wrist while mousing. Another thing to consider is your work surface height, making sure your wrist isn't bent up or down. That being said, I do notice people with this traditional mouse tend to get into these positions one way or another. A lot of times they're resting their underside of the wrist on a wrist rest or the work surface, which can lead to discomfort. You've got some nerves running here through what's known as the carpal tunnel. This is where you hear about carpal tunnel syndrome. This is where you hear about hand or wrist tendonitis. And this is where normally people start looking at an alternative to the traditional mouse. Enter the vertical mouse. There's many versions out there. The one I'm showing you here is a right-handed mouse. They do have a vertical mouse for the left hand as well. There are wired versions and there are also wireless versions. I'm showing you here a wireless version. Again, these are ideal because you can make sure you set this up with enough room to be able to move the mouse and to keep it close to your body. The main difference here is your hand configuration changes when you are using a vertical mouse, and you're still in a neutral wrist posture, but instead of being in this sort of neutral posture, it's almost like a handshake sort of neutral wrist posture. I'll try to kind of move here so you can get a better view of what I'm talking about here. But you can see there are buttons just like what we have on the traditional mouse. However, they're on the sides here for activation purposes. So basically you've rotated your entire hand 90 degrees and there's an activation set of buttons. You can also see there's a cursor feature like what you had. Basically everything just got rotated here and you're operating from a different angle than what you had with the traditional mouse, but you still have your wrist in a neutral posture. I do say you still can have a risk of flicking that wrist while you're mousing, even with this vertical mouse. So please, if you're looking at this as an alternative, make sure you continue to follow that whole arm mousing technique, not flicking that wrist. One thing that I mentioned in the traditional mouse was getting that work surface at the right height. Again, that same principle can apply because too high, too low, you're still going to have some deviations of your wrist. So no matter which mouse you choose, making sure that you have the work surface at the right height so that you're maintaining a neutral posture, whether it's the traditional mouse or this vertical mouse, is going to be very critical. And then making sure you use the device properly with that whole arm mousing technique will be very important for your health. But I would say that the vertical mouse is definitely something that is worth trying. If you're experiencing discomfort with the traditional mouse, take a look at the vertical mouse. Some vendors do offer free trials. If you know somebody using one, maybe you could try to borrow it for a period of time and just see if it's something that works well for you before you make the investment. Alternatives to the traditional mouse typically are quite personal in terms of what works for who. So I do encourage you to try to find a way to trial before you make a large investment, because some of the alternatives can be quite expensive. I hope this information helped. Thanks for taking the time to listen.